Welcome to Force for Good and our interview series on the future of capitalism. Today we have Heather Buchanan, who has a very interesting background for us on sustainability and its impact in the banking sector and in the UK. She's an advisor to the UK Parliamentary Committee that looks at fair banking practices. And she also is the co-founder of the Net Banking Alliance for NetZero in the UK. She has a background before that also, and concurrently with small and medium-sized enterprises to make sure they're getting a fair deal from banking and finance too. With that in mind, let me turn to Heather. Heather, welcome.
Thank you. Hello. Great to be here.
Pleasure to have you here, Heather. Heather, step back for me. Mm-hmm. You've got these fascinating roles which touch on government, its role in policy, its initiatives and ambition to have the UK be a significant player in sustainability. On the other side, you have the banking industry in one of the leading financial centres in the world, and their ambition to also play their role in net zero and in sustainability in the world. What do you see as the most important issues, challenges facing us?
Well, I think fundamentally, at the end of the day, we're in the process of going through an immense amount of change where risk and value are getting redefined, and getting redefined quite rapidly. And you've got a financial services sector that's essentially been, built up around risk and value over a number of centuries. And so there's an understood touch point between the real economy and the financial economy. I mean, fun fact, 1494 was the first book on modern accounting. And so we've had 500 and a bit years to, everybody understands, when they go to the bank that you have to provide your profit and loss or a cash flow forecast and all these things. And so to a certain extent, we can kind of speak the same language, and that's getting completely redefined in a matter of decades, if not years. And that's a big ask for anything. And we're talking about the future of capitalism. It really is the entire way that our system works. And you've got these amazing multinational institutions, again, that have built up systems and processes over decades or centuries, and all of that's having to change quite rapidly. So it's no small task there. Even some very basic things like data, and our core sustainability data, it just doesn't exist, or we don't know how to gather it, or also the public isn't necessarily aware that it's going to need to be part of your kind of day-to-day life in order to keep the system, evolving. And so it's some pretty fundamental stuff that we have to address at the heart of it.
That's really well put. I like the way you said it's a few hundred years, because in some parts of the world, of course, there isn't a legacy of a few hundred years of finance and banking. But in this city, in London, that's absolutely the case. And this transformation, you're saying, has to be now compressed into a matter of years so that we can deal with the future.
Yeah.
What's the mission?
So for Bankers for Net Zero, we very much look at things through the lens of the commitments that banks made under the Net Zero Banking Alliance. Now that's convened by the UN, and there's an amazing amount of work that's done there on international standards and reporting and whatnot. We look at the line within the commitments that say that banks have committed to decarbonising their financed emissions by 2050. And it's just a small line, but actually it means, and I think people are always surprised, well, that actually means that banks are on the hook for, and any financial institutions, not just your retail banks, every loan, every mortgage, every overdraft, every corporate loan and its supply chain. They need to understand and work with those customers on the ground to reach that 2050 ambition. And that, again, it's a tall order, and it's a tall order primarily. The data doesn't necessarily exist to actually understand that, and that's why all the great work that's going on here with the Transition Plan Task Force, getting transition plans in place, but there's such an immense amount of kind of contradictions in the system already. So we very much look at that and think, right, how do we make the regulatory and legislative environment in the UK the best that it can be to remove any barriers to those commitments being met, and B, accelerate finance. I mean, everybody says that there's lots of money out there, it just needs to flow in the right direction. And policy is a really powerful lever in that. So we're very, very focused. And we very much look at that touch point between the financial economy and the real economy, and making sure that the system is designed to help the real economy along its way. Because if we get it wrong and we get the signals wrong, then the effects can be quite, we can have some very poor outcomes both socially and environmentally. So policy has a huge place, in that.
Heather, fascinating. This city in particular, and its role in this. Do you think it's coming together? Are the leaders of London and the financial community that sits here starting to see the opportunity?
Absolutely. I mean, just how the narrative has changed over the last 4 or 5 years has been extraordinary, and it is really a key focal area. I mean, but back to where we started though, it needs that really strong leadership, and leaders really recognising the opportunity that comes from that, because it's such a big task that we've got ahead. Interesting though as well, when you speak to a lot of C-suite executives in the banks and financial institutions, they say it's quite often their employees that really take them to task on this as well. So it's there's the kind of whole expectation around what the value of work is and the value of your contribution is really starting to permeate the entire institutions, and I think that can only be a force for good.
Oh, that's wonderful. Heather, tell me, do you think the city is well positioned relative to other financial hubs to be a leader in this shift, this transition to something that is net zero?
Absolutely. I mean, London is one of the financial centres of the world, and I think always will be. And part of that has been because it does embrace opportunity as it comes along. We're in a difficult time, clearly, because of social issues and the cost of living crisis and everything else. And I think the City of London has a huge opportunity to lean in and invest in a lot of the solutions that we've got going there. I mean, the energy transition is a massive, and energy security in general, it's a massive opportunity that we've absolutely got the opportunity to lean into.
You put very well there also the fact that we're in a challenging time. In this challenging time, do people want to afford a more sustainable way of life, or do they just want the basics dealt with so that they have money and food on the table and so on?
I don't think those things have to be mutually exclusive.
I'm happy to hear you say that. Talk a little bit more about that. What would derail the program, the mission that you're on?
Politicizing the issue too much. I mean, if you really want to look at, if we're not taking away ESG, just even looking at at energy transition, I don't think the core objectives of a clean energy transition, nobody argues with them. No. Nobody argues with having sustainable, long-term, less expensive energy sources. Unfortunately, some of this does get conflated in social issues, and I think that that's unhelpful rather than looking at the opportunity that it actually provides. But when you really look at the underlying objectives, nobody argues with it. I mean, the big thing is who's going to pay for it, isn't it? And that's really what it comes down to. And that's where the finance industry has, and working with government and blended finance models, that's where we've got some opportunity. And we have to start thinking creatively about the way that we do it, so that it's not just the people that can't afford it being asked to pick up the bill, or the small businesses that can't afford that kind of initial capital expenditure. But I think that's where the city's actually really well placed to come up with some quite innovative funding solutions in conjunction with government. So you've got the blended finance to kind of move that market along. And there's obviously a kind of a pain period, but we're let's face it, we're in a pain period anyway. Let's try to lean into it and turn it into an opportunity.
Is there a sense that the CEOs have embraced it, their people have embraced it, the level of innovation is now coming to the fore where we will see this transition?
Absolutely. I think that there's still policy certainty is certainly an area where we get a lot of frustration, certainly from our kind of members in the private sector, saying they want a much kind of clearer path. There's some other really basic things. We talked, about data. We're doing a Project Perseus right now, which is looking at automating assurable data reporting so we can get assurable kind of scope 3 data. It sounds really simple, but it's not been done yet. And until we actually also tackle some of the really basic things, we're going to go in circles. And so we need to move forward with things like that as well.
Heather, do you feel that government supports you well in this task, this mission?
So in terms of Perseus, we're in the Green Finance Strategy. We
Yes.
work with a fantastic group within government. So absolutely we do. Electoral cycles make things difficult. Just, when you're working on a 5-yearly election term, so there has to, I think that's one of the big challenges, and it's very much acknowledged, whether from the Climate Change Committee to government itself, or the parties themselves, that this requires long-term thinking that has to transcend electoral cycles.
Are there consequences for failure that are clear to you now if we don't manage to do this? What are they?
So back to that not getting that touch point between the financial economy and the real economy.
Yes.
That we need to retrofit our housing stock in this country. Massive issue. Banks are grappling with this already, but we need to be able to measure the energy performance. That's not done very well now through EPCs, so there needs to be kind of reform in that area. But if you don't get that touch point right, you can potentially have situations where you get mortgage prisoners because properties become unmortgageable, or it becomes more expensive to mortgage an older property that's not been maintained. There's some very subtle nuance within these that if we don't get it right, actually, will have quite serious kind of implications on the ground for people. Likewise, the need for financial institutions to now understand that energy consumption and transition plans of their business and their business customers, we need to make sure that interaction is clear and understood by both sides, and there's a plan for that. And we're literally kind of building the plane as we fly it, and this, which is not necessarily a level of comfort, particularly for an industry that's quite risk averse. So that touch point and that understanding, and making sure that we keep things, that the data flow is right, that the data is accurate, and that we understand how to benchmark progress along the way, will be critical. Otherwise, the system will get clogged up, and you will have very poor, adverse social consequences on the back of it. Not to mention the known environmental issues. So it's very important.
Heather, take us to the most radical part of the levels at which we're meant to achieve net zero. And if they go to the ultimate level, everything they fund is neutral or positive to climate. How far have we gone down that path?
I mean, if that's a kind of a trek up a mountain, I think that we're still at the hut at the bottom, kind of
right.
Figuring out the path to get there.
Yeah.
We're still in the mapping stage of it. We haven't, maybe done, played a bit in the foothills, but there's a long journey to go, in my opinion.
There's a long journey to go. I'm glad to hear you give us the realism of where we are at this moment. Now, you see the will to actually climb. I've done some climbing myself, and I remember you train a lot, and you think you're going to give up somewhere in the foothills, actually. Mm-hmm. And if you get past that point, then actually just gets steeper and steeper and steeper and harder and harder and harder. You keep going. Mm. Do we have the will to keep going?
Yes, and at the end of the day, we have to. It's not, I think with the kind of growing evidence, that's becoming your forest fires and floods and everything else we've got going. It's not a nice to have this. It's something we're just going to have to push through. And I mean, if there's one thing that COVID taught us, is that we can change quite quickly when we need to. So yes, and I am an optimist, so we have to be, otherwise what's the point?
So I'm going to contrast two approaches we've seen. One is the American approach, which says they do have the Inflation Reduction Act now, which gives them a huge amount of capital to invest. Traditionally, they've been the best at innovation, so they have huge innovative big bets they're placing for sustainability, and on social issues too. At the same time, they have this flood of money, which is designed to boost that even further. On the European side, they've now also found money to compete with the American money, but their approach has been to regulate it. What is the British approach?
I think we very much like to lead with kind of industry-led initiatives that, you you think of TCFD and other things, where you get a level of kind of industry buy-in and then regulation kind of follows on the back of that. Quite often, I think that's very much a kind of British approach to things. Some would argue that takes too long and that we don't have time for everybody to figure it out together. There's probably a kind of happy medium that we can get out there. And clearly, I've certainly heard from industry as well before, where you've actually got industry going, just regulate. Actually, go ahead and cut through some of the noise and just get us to move forward. So, I do think that there's a bit of a desire for some potentially kind of bolder policy interventions to really move things forward, but there's also, I guess, a level of pragmatism of kind of building something so that it works with industry before it gets regulated. So
let me ask you to draw it together and give us one message as to what you think we need to take away in terms of achieving this target.
It's actually getting the data and the interface right. It's got to be there's so much noise out there, and there's so many, you actually find that we've got information being held in different areas, getting interpreted in different ways without a really common baseline. It'd be the equivalent of if you had the big four consultants, and accountancy firms going out and competing with each other on how they present a P&L or balance sheet. That's that's still where we are now. Actually, we all need to agree what the P&L looks like, what the balance sheet looks like, and then when you need to look behind the numbers of the P&L, even now, if you said, let me drill into that number, and sustainability, a lot of it's like, well, we use proxy data for that, or it's based on this. We need to kind of get that evolution so that we've got some standards to work around. We're comparing apples with apples and then moving forward, because there's too much noise and confusion, I think, in the system right now.
Heather, let's draw it together. What are the key messages for the City of London to be a great player in the future in this arena for sustainability?
So I guess in three core things. We need to get the data right. It's a basic foundation that we need to work with. Second one is back to risk and value. Risk and value are getting transformed at an accelerated speed right now, as we discussed earlier. So really embracing that and getting that value proposition out there is a key thing. And then I think third is using the legacy of the city. We are a massive financial centre, always have been, and hopefully always will be. And back to our, getting to the foothills of this, is the city has a real opportunity to use that legacy to really push forward and be leaders in this space. And I think that's where we really need to be.
Heather, thank you. That pulls it together really well, actually, and the key message is very clear. The future of the city depends, in some ways, on achieving this goal, this ambition, planting that flag on your mountain. Thank you.